I stepped through the doors of the banquet hall and instantly knew I didn't belong. The lights were soft but too bright, like they were trying to make the night feel warmer than it really was. Conversations buzzed everywhere, but no one looked up when I entered. I paused near the entryway, smoothing down the front of my dress out of habit more than nerves. My heels clicked against the marble floor, sharp and unfamiliar, echoing in a room that pretended not to notice me. A small clutch dangled from my hand, more accessory than necessity, but I held onto it like it was the only thing tethering me there. It was our 25th high school reunion, held at a boutique hotel downtown with chandeliers and champagne towers that tried too hard. The place smelled like roses and polished wood. I scanned the crowd and didn't see a single face light up when they saw me. In the far corner, I spotted my parents. My mother turned her head just enough to meet my eyes. Her expression didn't shift. She leaned toward my father, whispered something, and then turned her back. I walked in anyway. My feet moved even as every part of me told me to turn around. Laughter rolled through the room, groups clinking glasses and flashing their wedding rings like business cards. No one stopped to greet me. Not the girl who borrowed my notes all of junior year. Not the guy I'd stayed up with after prom, sitting on the hood of his car while he cried about his dad. They passed me like I was air. My name wasn't on any of the main tables. When I asked a server, she double-checked, then pointed toward the edge of the room near the exit. I sat down at a table tucked between the coat rack and the photo booth. The card in front of me just read, Natalie Green. No rank, no title, no mention of anything I'd done since the last time most of these people saw me. Across the room, the slideshow had already started. Baby pictures, football games, graduation caps. Names I remembered, lives I didn't recognize. Applause followed each introduction like clockwork. I recognized my brother's name before his face even appeared. They'd given him a full slide, arms crossed in front of the sleek logo of his tech company. My mother beamed nearby like she'd won something. No one mentioned me. Not even once. I wasn't sure which hurt more, the silence or the certainty in it. I stirred the ice in my untouched drink and tried to remind myself why I came. Maybe I thought time would have changed something. Maybe I still believed I could be seen. My chair wobbled slightly every time I shifted. The tablecloth had a stain at the corner, barely hidden beneath the chipped vase holding wilting flowers. I tried not to take it personally, but everything about the setup felt like a message. The stage was lit up in soft blues and golds, and one by one, names were announced with practiced flair. People cheered like they'd never stopped being 16. My classmates, now surgeons, entrepreneurs, and TED speakers, paraded across the screen like they were still being voted most likely to succeed. Then came my brother. A full screenshot, tailored suit, hands folded like he'd just stepped out of a magazine. Ethan Green, Stanford grad, founder of Vertitech Global. The applause was louder, longer. My mother stood up to clap, her pearls catching the light. She looked proud. The kind of pride that fills a room and leaves no space for anyone else. My father stayed seated, but he nodded with slow approval. They didn't look over at me. I watched it all quietly, sipping water I didn't want. No one mentioned I was once the class president, or that I led the school's only volunteer initiative for inner-city tutoring, or that I won the state essay competition, which got our school on the map. None of that showed up in the slideshow. No mention, no name, no photo. I was the ghost at the banquet, present only in body. And somehow, even that felt like an intrusion. I remembered prom night, when I gave my ticket to a classmate who couldn't afford one, or how I stayed late after finals to help clean out the library when no one else showed. I didn't do those things to be remembered, but I never imagined they'd be this easy to forget. When dessert arrived, I pushed the dry cake around with a fork. A few people at other tables glanced at me and looked away. No one walked over. No one even pretended to notice I was sitting alone. It wasn't just the reunion. It was years of small silences, holiday cards with only Ethan's face, phone calls that ended when I talked about deployments, conversations that paused when I walked into a room. At first, I told myself they didn't understand. It was hard to connect with someone in a uniform, but the older I got, the clearer it became. They weren't confused, they just weren't interested. My parents stopped asking what I did after year 5. When I earned my first commendation, I sent them a photo. They never replied. I found it months later, buried in a family album behind Ethan's college acceptance letter. Sometimes I'd wonder what it would feel like to be seen through their eyes, not as a mistake or a story to avoid, but as a person, whole and flawed, but still theirs. Tonight made the answer clearer than ever. I wasn't just overlooked, I was edited out. I looked down at the name card in front of me. Natalie Green. No military title, no service record, no +1. Just a name printed in small black font, like I'd RSVP'd late, and they weren't sure what to do with me. The MC took the mic again and cracked a joke about the valedictorian who now sells real estate. The crowd laughed. My name didn't come up. I was once that overachiever, the one everyone said would make it big. But here, in this room, I didn't exist. Not really. I stared at my reflection in the water glass, half lit by the chandelier above. I didn't feel less. I felt erased. And that's what hurt most. Not the absence of applause, but the quiet certainty that no one even noticed I was missing. I was folding my napkin for the 3rd time when someone slid into the seat beside me. I looked up and saw Melissa Langston, someone I hadn't spoken to since junior year, but somehow her face still felt familiar. Her eyes held something I didn't expect, regret maybe, or something heavier. She didn't smile, just leaned in slightly and said, "I thought you should see this." Her phone was already in her hand, screen unlocked, the message waiting. I hesitated. Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. She turned the phone so I could read. The subject line read, "Removal request, Natalie Green. My name, clinical and isolated." The sender's email address stopped me before the first line even landed. It was my father's work address, dated nearly 15 years ago. I read the first line. Given Natalie's decision to discontinue her academic track and pursue alternative employment, we feel her inclusion in the upcoming alumni recognition materials may create confusion about our family's values. I blinked, not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it too well. The words weren't emotional. They were calculated, designed to bruise without sounding angry. I read it again, this time slower. They weren't just indifferent. They had intervened, deliberately, quietly, without telling me. Alternative employment. That was how they described 20 years in military intelligence. Years of classified briefings, field deployments, and months spent decoding threats before they turned into headlines. They made it sound like I'd taken a job at a grocery store instead of leading black ops teams overseas. I didn't say anything. My hands were cold on my lap, still clutching the napkin. I looked at Melissa, but she didn't speak. She swiped to the next email. This one was from my mother. It was addressed to the Department of Defense, dated more recently. Natalie has expressed a preference for privacy and wishes to withdraw her name from consideration. We ask that you respect her request and do not publicize the nomination. It was for the Medal of Honor, a nomination I never knew existed. My voice caught in my throat. I had never asked for that. I would have remembered. My mother didn't just decide I shouldn't be honored. She told them I didn't want to be, like I was ashamed, like I needed to be protected from the very thing I had risked everything to earn. My chest tightened. I wasn't angry yet. What I felt was deeper. Like something had cracked, slowly and quietly, beneath the surface for years, and was finally splitting open. All the missed calls, the empty chairs at award ceremonies, the way my name was always the last one spoken if it was spoken at all. It wasn't neglect, it was a choice. They had chosen not just to forget me, but to erase me, neatly, politely, with formality that made it harder to confront. Melissa didn't apologize. She didn't need to. She knew that silence had already said enough. Her phone stayed in the center of the table, like a piece of evidence in a trial that no one else was attending. I closed my eyes for a second and tried to breathe. The room hadn't changed. The music still played. My parents were still somewhere across the hall, laughing, sipping wine, beaming at Ethan like the sun rose just for him. But everything had changed. I wasn't paranoid. I hadn't imagined it. The distance wasn't an emotional misunderstanding. It was engineered. They'd built an entire life where I didn't exist. I opened my eyes and looked back at the screen. The date on the first email burned into my mind. It was the same month I'd returned from a 13-month deployment. I came home expecting a welcome. They were busy rewriting the story. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just sat there, the emails like weights in my lap. This wasn't silence. This was sabotage. And the worst part wasn't what they did. It was how easy it was for them. How natural. How quiet. Like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. The toast came just after the entrees were cleared. The MC stepped back up with a grin that looked rehearsed, holding his glass like it was part of a magic trick. "Let's hear it for the class of 1998, he shouted, then added with a chuckle, "Some of us went corporate, some creative. Has anyone here become a general?" The crowd laughed politely. It was a throwaway line, meant to land lightly, but my father didn't miss a beat. "If my daughter's a general, then I'm a ballerina," he said loud enough for the next few tables to hear. Laughter erupted, sharper this time, the kind that doesn't wait for permission. A woman nearby clapped her hand over her mouth, giggling. "Didn't she do some summer boot camp or something?" My mother chimed in, smiling with a calm coolness. She always did have a dramatic side, probably still peeling potatoes somewhere in the desert. It wasn't the words that hit me. It was the ease in their delivery, as if mocking me was just part of the entertainment. No one corrected them. Not one voice said, "Actually, she served over 20 years." Not even Melissa, who was still sitting just a few tables over, could hold my gaze. The jokes kept coming. My brother didn't laugh, but he didn't stop it either. He stared down at his phone, acting like the floor had suddenly become interesting. The room shifted. What started as banter turned into open sport. A few people leaned over to whisper, then turned to look at me like I was a strange headline. I didn't flinch. Years of command had taught me how to hold still, how to breathe through impact without showing the bruise. But it hurt. Not in the way a slap hurts, but like being slowly uninvited from your own life, word by word, laugh by laugh. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My posture didn't change. The air around me thickened, full of unspoken rules I couldn't break without becoming the problem. They laughed like it cost them nothing. My father sat back in his chair, sipping his whiskey like the room had earned his approval. My mother wore the smile she used at fundraisers. Soft, distant, calculated. The people who once asked me for rides home, who cried on my shoulder when college letters didn't come, who said I was the one they looked up to. They were all here. Not one said a word. It was like watching a rerun of your worst memory. Familiar lines, familiar faces, and no way to change the ending. My throat felt tight, but I didn't let it show. I took a sip of water, let it settle. The ice clinked softly. My heartbeat was louder. Being invisible had hurt, but this being laughed at, dismissed like a punchline, cut deeper, because they weren't confused. They knew exactly who I was, and they still chose to turn me into a joke. I left the ballroom without looking back. The hallway was quiet, and I didn't pass anyone on the way to the elevator. Inside, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls, expression blank, shoulders pulled tight. My suite was on the 17th floor, reserved under a different name. The kind of quiet that filled the room felt earned, like silence that had waited its turn. I kicked off my heels and stood barefoot in the soft carpet, trying to remember how to breathe like myself again. That's when my phone buzzed. No caller ID. Just a secure ping, followed by a rotating encryption code. I knew the sound before I even looked. My heart didn't race. My mind didn't panic. This was familiar ground. I tapped the screen. Merlin escalation. Status 3. Movement detected. Requesting eyes. I read it again, then moved toward the closet. Behind my luggage was a case no one else knew existed. I slid the panel open, placed my hand on the scanner, and waited for the soft click. 1 second later, the lock disengaged. Inside was who I really was. The uniform, folded with precision. The encrypted tablet, powered down but always ready. My ID badge, rank etched into metal, stared back like a mirror that told the truth. I sat on the edge of the bed and powered on the device. Lines of coded intel flickered to life. 3 regions, multiple threat levels, one familiar name repeating, Merlin. I flagged that name 6 months ago. Everyone said it was noise. I knew better. I always did. The ache from the reunion was still there, but it faded under something sharper, purpose. I pulled the secure line. The voice came through steady. Lieutenant General Green, confirmation requested. Immediate presence required in D.C. by 0600. I didn't hesitate. Confirmed, I said, clear and calm. I wasn't the ghost at a banquet anymore. I stared at the stars on my uniform, quiet but unmistakable. They didn't know who I was, but they would, soon. The ground started to tremble just as the MC lifted his glass for one final toast. At first, it felt like distant thunder, but then the windows rattled and the lights flickered overhead. People turned toward the glass walls, phones already in hand, faces shifting from confusion to awe. Outside, a matte black helicopter descended fast. No logos, just floodlights slicing through the night like white fire. It landed with a force that sent napkins flying and knocked over one of the centerpiece arrangements. The ballroom doors blasted open with a gust of wind that silenced every voice. 2 officers stepped inside. Their movements were precise, their uniforms crisp. They didn't glance around. They walked directly to me. Colonel Reeves was in front. I recognized him before he spoke. Lieutenant General Green, ma'am. Pentagon requests your immediate presence. He handed me a sealed folder without breaking eye contact. The room fell completely still. My mother's face lost its practiced poise. My father's glass trembled slightly in his hand. Ethan looked like he had forgotten how to blink. Someone dropped their phone. A gasp followed. Chairs scraped back in a wave of disbelief. I stood slowly, every step measured. I turned to face my parents. They didn't speak. I didn't wait for them to try. You didn't just ignore me, I said, voice calm. You erased me. But now, in front of everyone you tried to impress, they'll remember what you tried to hide. I didn't look for a reaction. It wasn't about them anymore. This moment wasn't theirs to hold. Colonel Reeves straightened beside me. Chopper's ready, ma'am. I nodded. I walked past my classmates, past the MC who still hadn't picked up his mic, past the laughter that had turned into stunned silence. I didn't smile. I didn't look back. At the door, a murmur rose. Words like general and why didn't anyone know floated behind me. I kept walking. This time, they saw me. Not as a story they could twist, but as the truth they could no longer ignore. The sun rose slowly over the garden lawn. Rows of white chairs stretched neatly across the grass, filled with uniforms, reporters, and dignitaries. A low hum of anticipation hung in the air like the pause before a national anthem. I stood at the center of the platform, dress blues pressed, posture steady. The silence wasn't tense. It was reverent. The president stepped forward with a folder in hand. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His words came clear and even. For extraordinary leadership, sustained service, and unwavering integrity in operations critical to national security. He closed the folder, then stepped closer. The Medal of Honor gleamed against the morning light. He placed it around my neck. It was heavier than I expected, not from the medal, but from everything it meant. There was no cheering, just a stillness that carried more weight than applause ever could. My breath held steady. I glanced briefly into the third row. My parents sat side by side. My father's hands were clenched tight. My mother's expression was blank, lips thin, eyes forward. They didn't smile. They didn't clap. They watched. It was enough. This moment wasn't for them. It never was. Across the lawn, people stood to their feet. Fellow officers, retired commanders, and young cadets. Some saluted. Some simply placed a hand over their heart. I felt seen, not just as a soldier, but as a person, no longer a shadow at someone else's celebration. The cameras clicked in rhythm, but I barely heard them. What I felt most was the quiet, the kind that doesn't hide pain, but honors it. I stepped back from the podium and stood alone at the center. The ribbon brushed my collar. It didn't feel like validation. It felt like the truth. My name was spoken clearly, Natalie Green. No titles, no edits. Just what mattered. Somewhere behind me, a young cadet whispered, "She's the reason I signed up." I didn't turn. I didn't need to. That voice was enough. It carried farther than anything my parents had ever said. This wasn't a reward. It was recognition, and no one could take it away. I was walking the garden path alone when I heard footsteps behind me. They were light, a little uncertain. I turned and saw a cadet, maybe 20, standing there with wide eyes and trembling hands. She wore her uniform like it still felt new. Freckles dotted her cheeks, and her voice shook when she spoke. "Ma'am, you're the reason I enlisted." I didn't say much, just nodded once. That was enough. She didn't ask for a photo or a handshake. She just looked at me like I was something she didn't know could exist. And I saw a reflection of my younger self in her eyes. As she turned to leave, I felt something settle. Not the pride the way the world defines it. Something quieter, more honest. Legacy doesn't come from applause or names in programs. It comes from being seen, fully and without revision. From showing up when no one thinks you will. I didn't need my parents to stand. I didn't need their words. Someone else had spoken. And in that moment, I finally understood. The truth lasts longer than silence ever could. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should have seen you first, I want you to know you're not alone. I spent years thinking my silence made me strong, but silence can also make you disappear. There were times I believed I had to earn love by being more, doing more, proving myself over and over. But the truth is, your worth isn't up for debate. You matter, even when they don't see it. If you've ever been erased, dismissed, or edited out of your own story, drop a 1 in the comments. Not for the algorithm, but so others like us know they're not the only ones. And if you've started to reclaim your voice, even just a little, drop a 2. Because someone out there needs to see it's possible. That healing can come in quiet ways. That being real is more powerful than being loud. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And most of all, thanks for still standing.